Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Moonshot NFT podcast. It is great to be back in our new and upgraded little studio space, which before we dive in, I will just say is a work in progress. So you'll see this evolve over the next few episodes, but I'm joined with my wonderful co-host, Matt. Matt, great to see you. How you doing?
Good, super well. Really good. And like you say, loving the new set, loving the fresh light that we've got coming in, the windows. Elliot now has an office with windows, everyone. This is big news.
Serious upgrade. But then it's a very exciting episode this week because we have a wonderful guest. We have the wonderful Harry who has joined us today. So Harry, how are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Matt. And I'm not sure if this plant has a name, but thank you, because it feels like it's on my shoulder here, but yeah.
Well, it's very good. Harry has travelled hundreds of miles to be with us today. And I've known Harry for a little while now through various sort of trading communities is how we kind of met each other. But Harry, for our wonderful listeners at home, just give us the, little short summary of your life.
Okay, well, in 1982, now I won't start that far back, but so I had a career in the Royal Air Force. That ended in 2012. I moved into the construction industry, and I don't do that anymore. But whilst I was in the construction industry, about 2017, someone mentioned this funny word to me called Bitcoin, which I'd never heard of and I ignored initially. And then came to around about November 2017, and I decided to look into Bitcoin a little bit more because everybody was talking about it, even your taxi driver was. And so I decided to take the plunge, and I can tell you the exact first day that I bought Bitcoin, which was the 9th of December 2017, which was the day of the all-time high for Bitcoin on that bull run. Yes, unfortunately. So I bought it about $19,000. But I was utterly fascinated within it. And yes, I continued to try and buy, not knowing that we were at the top of the market. But just leaving that to one side, it suddenly awoken me to the fact that I knew nothing about finance. I knew nothing about anything like that. And I don't know if the same experience happens with yourself or with your listeners, but once I started to understand what potentially Bitcoin and some cryptos could do, it kind of opened up the words, well, what's wrong with our current system? And I started actually looking into that because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't understand how money was made. Yes, I'd heard of things like interest rates and inflation, but if someone had asked me in a party what they meant, I would have been struggling to change the conversation. So it was a bit of an education for me. And since 2017, I have continuously been in crypto. Yes, I've taken profits, and yes, I've sold, but I've always come back in, and I've never left the space. And I just kept on learning things. And because it was such a new sector, industry, whatever you want to call it, there was so much to learn. And everything that I learned just sort of kept me going, kept me thinking, actually, this is pretty good. And what turned into, an hour a week, then turned into a bit of a hobby. I was doing a few hours a week. Then my wife will tell you it turned into an obsession, and I'm suddenly dedicated 6 hours a day to this. And I've found it incredibly interesting, and sort of the amount of people that I've met from it, what it's sort of opened me up to and exposed to has been fantastic. So, yeah.
In those early days, because I think one of the things we try to talk about in previous episodes, and the whole point of this podcast is to kind of help anyone that is curious just find out more about mainly NFT investing, but it's so linked obviously to the crypto space that I'm sure anyone that is curious about NFTs, if they don't, if they're not currently kind of holding some crypto or in that world, then they're going to be looking into that as well. But so in those early days, or when you got to the point of 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, what were you actually doing? What were you looking at?
Okay, so I think most people will know the crypto Twitter, which is both a blessing and a curse. And you need to know how to navigate that. But actually, that's not where I necessarily started. So I joined a trading group, and there was a trading course within that. And whilst it predominantly spoke about how you traded, there were elements and segments in that which talked about cryptocurrency. But that sort of led you on to, okay, well, I know what Bitcoin is, but what is a blockchain? What is a decentralized ledger technology? All that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, actually, I kind of need to understand that, because ultimately I'm putting, at the time, a reasonable amount of my wealth into this product, or whatever you would like to have called it. At the time, I thought it was a product, didn't know anything about it. And so, YouTube, I have to, I'll hold my hands up and say that was a really interesting space to be involved in, because there was a lot of information about it, but it was trying to discern, am I listening to the right information? And is this person actually telling me, one, they've understood the technology correctly themselves, but two, and what I found very quickly was there was always an underlying regime in most of these, and it was buy my course at the end or get into this token or what have you. And but I think the internet was where I learned everything. Yes, I bought books and I bought audio books and all that kind of stuff, but it was just reading in. And then, unfortunately, I have to say, a lot of trial and error. I made a huge amount of mistakes going in, understanding how you transfer this magical internet money, because it isn't so easy as just putting in 4 figures. You have to think about this key, which is alphanumeric, and it's case sensitive, and it's about 64 characters long. You learn how to do that, but then, because it's quite alien, repeatedly doing it, and it's a bit like muscle memory. Just you do it enough times and things start to stick.
It is very much like the Wild Wild West, I always say, because we always try and talk about how with crypto and NFTs, like one of the big reasons why the adoption of it is relatively modest, especially if you look at any sort of percentage figures, is because just the action of getting involved is by default currently very complicated, even for relatively tech savvy people. And so for those who are, seeking this out for the first time and not really sure where to look, because this is such a new emerging industry, you don't have the luxury of loads of books that have been published and all of the manner of, certified information sources. You do have to lean on crypto Twitter and YouTube and Reddit and all this kind of stuff, which on one hand can be great. It's all free information that is out there. But on the other hand, you have to develop that sort of layer of initial understanding and I suppose kind of critical thinking to be able to discern what is actually correct information and what is, someone trying to sell me a course or something. So it does require a degree of skill, I find.
It does. And the other thing is, I'll try not to put a tinfoil hat on when I say this, but you'll agree most people that are in the crypto space maybe have a healthy distrust of the current financial system. And it's fair to say that certainly with the recent months and recent moves that the United States are making in terms of how they're going with the regulation of it, that the current financial system probably doesn't trust crypto either. So you talk about not being textbooks and sort of recognized documents that are on this. Well, there is 2 reasons. One, it's so new that we don't have regulations on it yet. And so we don't have the backbone of which textbooks can be made. But 2, I also think that they're not particularly forward in providing that information because they don't really want you to learn about that because they're quite happy with the current system. And I'm sure in 20 years' time, and I do believe it will, but if crypto is adopted by then, that we will start to see that sort of, I don't want to say government sponsored, but, it backed and maybe taught in schools or wherever where you can actually go and learn that. And, there are steps that are being made. There's the University of Texas now runs a course on cryptocurrency. So there are places that are starting to look towards that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Interesting. So let's just circle back on your story then. So originally in the RAF, which is where you met Simon, my friend, who's been on this podcast as well. Before then, left the RAF, construction for a while. And then what was it after construction?
So I sort of set up a property business initially, which was fine. I did enjoy doing that. But at the same time, that's when I was heavily in cryptocurrency. 2020, 2021, the 2021 bull run had started. And I was fortunate enough to get in relatively early within that cycle. So before most people had started to, FOMO in with the hype, I was actually already starting to see some very profitable outlooks. And so actually the excitement of that kind of took over, and that started being more and more my day-to-day activities of just, checking the internet every 5 seconds to see what the price of Bitcoin's doing, etc.
And was it solely Bitcoin, or was it a mixture of...
No, so actually, so my first bull run was pretty much Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's 2017. And then in the second one, I moved into Bitcoin initially, but I very quickly moved into, or diversified, I still kept the Bitcoin, into altcoins. And Ethereum at the time was very cheap. And back then, that was pretty much the go-to layer one. So I know we're going to talk about NFTs later, and predominantly the vast majority of NFTs are based off that network. And so that was seeing a huge uptick in price. And I would say probably off the back of NFTs and gas fees and everything else that was, people were having to buy ETH just to trade, and the gas fees you were paying were ridiculous. But there were a few other, I'd call them blue chip, but respected altcoins that I moved into, things like Polkadot, Cardano, even XRP. Although I don't really believe in what Ripple are doing, I knew that it was a well thought of cryptocurrency that would probably move the same way that the market did. And then, like everybody else, as the bull market matured into sort of that mania phase, as I called it, I again looked to diversify into other things. And, you know, that sounds like a really easy stepping stone, but there were huge amounts of mistakes that were made. And particularly towards the end, you know, we're all human and we all fall into that greed. And sometimes there's some big warning signals that perhaps the market's about to end, but you don't take them straight away. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, I always say there's a few lessons in life that I feel you can only learn the hard way. And I think taking profits is certainly one of those.
Definitely.
But so let's just discuss then, so your current position, because arguably to many, I would say that you're somewhat living the dream at the moment.
Okay.
Because you progressed through this variety of careers and then got involved in crypto after, you know, beginning to gain that interest in the financial, I guess, markets and currencies and that sort of thing. And of course, Bitcoin coming on the radar. But so now you spend, you know, talk us through your typical week.
Okay, yeah. So someone asked me recently, like, you know, what is my job? And that's, I don't know. I don't know whether to class it as being social media or to actually being within cryptocurrency, because what I do now is, I would say, very much social media based. So I'm very active within a couple of trading communities. I do live talks on YouTube every week. I do videos each week as well. And it is generally educational stuff. I don't post trades. I'm not really into that because I don't really do that kind of stuff myself. And so that takes a lot of prep work to sort of understand what you want to cover. And then obviously you have to research it, make sure you know what you're going to talk about so you don't look like an idiot. And that imposter syndrome definitely kicks in because there is always someone out there that knows more than you do, but you just got to push past that, I suppose. And so, yeah, so those live talks, typically a couple of hours each of those, and then try and condense certain sections of that down into what I'd call a scripted YouTube video, which is about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I put that one out as well. And then the rest of the time is generally helping people. And I do, even now in the turn between the bear market into the bull market, you know, get tens of DMs every week with people, whether they're in the trading community or not, asking for help because they've, you know, don't understand something, or they've gone and done something very stupid, and they need to get out of that situation very quickly. And I think that's kind of how I made a name for myself in the group that you and I are in. In the last bull run, we were getting a lot of very new, very green individuals into the group, and not necessarily. Well, I will actually say, their fault. It was their fault because they overexposed themselves. That's going to be polite. They would potentially do something, and they'd be asking for advice in the group, and lots of people have, you could probably remember what it was like, but lots of messages flying all the time. You kind of get lost in different conversations happening at the same time. So I'd get those DMs typically about 11 o'clock at night before I'd give everyone to go to bed, and I'd read what the situation was, and people are worried about losing 40, 50, 100,000 pounds, and I was sort of saying to my wife, well, I have to help them now, because if that was me, I couldn't go 8 hours waiting for an answer. I'd want to know, and jump on, and there were thankfully success stories within those, and we were able to help people, and the situation wasn't as bad as they saw, or we were able to find a work way around it, and they'd recover, if not all, some of it. Unfortunately, there were times where I've had to let people know that they have been hacked and they've had their entire portfolio taken, which is difficult bullet to bite. And I just thank that I had some compassionate training in the military, because people would say I'm not a very compassionate person, but you at least taught how to give bad news, and that I never thought I'd have to use it in this circumstance. But when you're talking about the size of money people have lost, sadly there's no way of beating around the bullet. You've just got to let them know and then try and deal with it afterwards. And that got me a lot of, I think, good credit within the group. And then from that, people started to ask my opinions on stuff, which then ultimately led to these weekly live calls. And it's gone from there.
So what was the worst piece of bad news that you had to deliver?
So I had one individual, this was the 11 o'clock at night. This is why I always think it's 11 o'clock at night in my head, who just dropped me a message. I'd not really engaged with them in the group before, but I had seen them in the group. And they had said, I think my MetaMask wallet has been hacked. I was okay. Sort of went to my PC, booted up, and I said, well, whilst I'm doing this, just send me your address and I'll go on Etherscan and we'll have a look and see where it is. And as I typed in everything I saw, I had to do a double take. So I was like, okay, I can see some big transactions that have just moved here. And of course it's blockchain, so you can follow the transactions. And so I could see that about 8 hours prior to that, someone had moved everything in his wallet out. And then I could see where they'd moved it and kept on moving it and moving it. And in the space of about an hour, it moved to 17 different addresses. And I kind of knew, unfortunately, something's wrong here. But ultimately, it's left his wallet, so he has no custody over it anymore. And that was at the time, the value of everything was about 1.3 million.
Jeez.
Which was devastating, because whilst we're having this and I'm researching it, I kind of had this inkling something's happened. So I was talking about the circumstances of it, and it's heartbreaking to hear, someone, I mean, they're doing it over a keyboard, but to hear someone explaining how they got to that situation and what it means to them and everything. And then, just to let them know. And I just felt sick to my stomach. I remember I was wired though, 3 a.m, couldn't sleep. I sort of woke my wife up and was like, I don't know if I should go and see this guy, because you just don't know what the next step is. But we kept in touch a lot over the next week. And I have to say, fair play to this person, because they're still trading, they're still in the group. They haven't set it back. Okay. And they were just able to compartmentalize it all, which I don't think I could do that. But
what had happened?
So I watched one of your podcasts, and we were talking about Kevin Rose, and a very similar thing happened to him. So those days we were jumping in and out of things on MetaMask, and people just get a bit too comfortable with how you deal with that. And he wasn't using a cold wallet, like a Trezor or a Ledger to protect it. And so he had a pop-up come in, and he was just pressing yes, yes, yes. And this one pop-up came up, and it asked for his 12 seed phrase words. And he wasn't thinking, so he just typed them in.
Oh, really?
And someone obviously just, the software or the code behind that, just taking his keystrokes. Yeah. And they didn't do it straight away. They waited 3 hours. And then, but it took us a while to work out what had happened, because he was like, I don't understand it. And I was like, you have to send me your internet history, which also can be a delicate conversation to have with someone. But we were like, oh, well, what's this website? Because, that's not, I can't remember which crypto it was, but it was, instead of an O, it was a 0 or whatever. I was like, that's not a genuine link really you've clicked on there. And so, so they just then, copied his seed phrase. So whether, I like to say he was hacked, but in reality, unfortunately, it was his actions that caused that. Yeah. And we went in our group, we have a security thread, and we're very much, if you're spending even $1,000 in crypto, you should spend the minimum of £69 for a ledger and just become disciplined like that. Yeah. And we had to really reinforce that to everyone afterwards. I mean, I was pretty lax by then as well, so I sort of had to redouble my efforts. And it could happen to anyone, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, we've certainly, as you said, we've talked about a few horror stories before. I've clicked a wrong link before, all that sort of stuff. It's very easy to do, and it does tend to be when you're just either rushing through something or you're just not paying as much attention as you should be.
So you speak to my accountant, the amount of transactions I've done, but even now, even if I know the wallet's correct, I still only send the test amount first.
Do you?
Yeah. So, because sometimes I can be moving 5 figures in one go without thinking about it. So I'll just send $10 first.
Yes.
And unless I'm using Bitcoin, and that how slow that can be, despite the Lightning Network, generally you're only waiting a couple of minutes. Yes, they are a long couple of minutes, but it's even longer if you send 5 figures without a test and it's not got there. So I've just got into the habit of doing it now. And you pay a small fraction extra in fees. You're doing 2, but
nothing really. No.
Nothing to compare to losing it. So
it's perfect. It's always that seesaw between just the ease of sending it and convenience, and then ultimately the security, right? Which is an interesting one to balance.
Okay, it is. Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk then about your first ventures into the world of NFTs.
Okay.
How did that come about? When you first heard about them, what was your initial reaction?
So the first time I'd ever heard of NFTs was, it probably was Cyberpunk. So right back at the beginning, I couldn't even pronounce non-fungible tokens back then. I still struggle with it now. So I immediately liked the idea of what it could represent. But my first exposure to it I appreciate they have complete value to them now. But first looking at them as a newbie, that's nothing to be particularly impressed by. But hey, they absolutely skyrocketed. So I thought, what a great opportunity for the likes of digital artists who, you know, they need some way of protecting themselves. What a great function this could be to provide that. And I can actually see a lot more real world use in what could come from those, and, you know, songwriters and everything else, you know, fine. But I kind of just put it to one side and was like, okay, well, that's where we're at. And because I'm involved in the space and because I'm doing talks every week, of course, I would hear about Bored Ape Yacht Clubs and Mutant Apes and all that kind of stuff.
Did the frequency of NFTs getting mentioned in your chat start to...
Yes, it did. And, you know, I felt like, well, I probably should understand this space. And so I went onto OpenSea, even when I didn't have anything, and started to try and navigate it. And I have to say, when I first went onto OpenSea, what a difficult website that was to use. Now I think it's a lot easier to use. Still needs a bit of understanding how to work it. But so then it got to, I would say, I don't know, summer of 21, maybe even September, maybe into early autumn. And the frequency of these NFTs was starting to come out. And I was actually starting to see that I was getting airdropped NFTs. I never touched them. Anyone who airdrops me anything, I just don't bother touching it. But I was like, okay. And I started looking into, well, where could this potentially go? And I own a share in a racehorse in real life. And one of these ones that came across was a thing called D-Race, which is an online horse racing app. And they had horses that you could breed, if you will. And they were NFTs. And I thought, well, I own a horse in real, part of a horse in real life. So I'm so involved in crypto, maybe I should own a crypto racehorse. And so I got in very early, so generation 0. But then I wanted to, you know, because it was mania phase really. So I was like, okay, well, I'll also join the jockey club. So I had to buy a separate jockey, a separate NFT to be part of this jockey club. It's a very similar model probably to the Bored Ape Yacht Club there, where you get exclusive access to all this kind of stuff, but not quite the panache that came. So I you know, didn't get really a say in which jockey I could get. So it was a fairly unspectacular one, but there was only 5,000 ever made. So I've got one of 5,000. And, you know, we started, you know, putting my horses into races, and it's all based on the Polygon network. So, and they call them hippodromes, but they're effectively race courses, different kind of race horses. And you got grass and you got dirt and all that. And your horse, I mean, now they've got jockeys as well, but right at the beginning, they didn't have those. And yeah, you could bet on it. And unfortunately, my horse was pretty pants. So I think out of like the 27 races I ran, I think it won once. But, you know, I've not really done it since. And then now, that I was genuinely interested because being part of this jockey club, you could then also buy, well, in the future, buy these race courses, and you can manage the race courses, and then you get a percentage of the fees from each of the races that take place on them. And I was speaking with someone was in our group originally, who's left now, a guy called Steve Woody, who's very much into crypto gaming. And we were talking about, can you imagine if you could get the rights for, say, an Aintree or an Ascot and turn that into a hippodrome, and then, you know, people could race on it? It'd be fantastic. And, you know, unfortunately, the market kind of fell away, so we never really followed it through. But, you know, that was my first actual experience. I still have the horse. It's still there.
Is it worth anything?
So I paid about 1 ETH for it. So at the time it was about 3,500. And I think it's probably, I don't know, you get these joke offers on OpenSea all the time, don't you? So I think someone offered me like 0.14 for it or something. But I don't intend on selling it. And the reason, well, certainly now, the reason why is you can breed your horses. So to get if 2 Gen 0s bred, they would create a Gen 1. And then if a Gen 0 and a Gen 1 create what have you. Because I have a Gen 0, then I suppose in some weird way, that would be the one that everyone wanted to breed with. The purest. So I'm just going to wait to see where the next market goes. What is good is D-Race are still very active. They're still, you know, they've introduced jockeys now, and they're, you know, everything's still there. So I think the amount of races that happen, I mean, at the time, you couldn't get in the race for love nor money. One, you know, because there's just so many people were trying to race, and there was races about every 3 minutes. I think the amount of volume they deal with has definitely dropped. But they have their own token. You get paid into this D-Race token, which you can then, you know, you can buy it on crypto.com and all these other exchanges. So it's there. But it was just a fun exposure for me, really.
Nice.
That was the first dabble into it.
Nice. It's a good sign they're still going. Because I mean, we've talked about this before, but how NFTs have had to deal with the huge, market cycle, right? And of course, this last year, which I was looking at the charts the other day, I can't believe it's basically been a year of, in essence, since a big crash, and then it's just been sideways price action the whole way. And of course, NFTs have been hit very hard in that. And what we've seen as part of that package is all of these NFT projects who do their initial launch basically as their kind of fundraise to then promise to deliver on this roadmap and build these games or build these projects, etc., are running out of cash because either A, they had it all stored in crypto, which then just, diminished the price, or just didn't have the appropriate financial planning to give them the runway needed to basically survive till the next cycle, or to actually build the product to a point where it, by its own merit, will bring, demand its own user count and then be able to generate revenue again. But sounds like that one, based on what you're saying.
That one was a success. There's a couple of others that I have, and I don't even really know the official name of one of them, but they're called the idols. They're like I don't know, Roman or Greek kind of god type things, and they provide me with staked Ethereum. I have 4 of those. It was purchased in a very weird way in a Dutch auction, which I'm sure you guys, from NFT point of view, know about that. But that was an unusual experience, and I got into that solely because of hype. No other reason. I didn't really research it very well. But I got 4 and minted them 4. They didn't call it minting. It was some sort of Greek word they used, but effectively minted these 4. So you didn't know what you didn't really know what I was getting. 3 of them were very common, but I got one super rare one. So like a really rare skin, really rare clothing and background. I thought, oh, this is actually pretty exciting. Again, the market for those has massively fallen away.
What was the premise with that collection then? If you held it, you would earn stakes.
So you get, I really don't know too much about it, but they were the guardians of whatever DAO or whatever they're working for. And so I suppose the money that's back behind that is earning yield in the background, and then that's paid to each of the holders in staked Ethereum, which, at the time looked really great. And then there were some issues with staked Ethereum, but ultimately it's still there for me. And I don't know how much I really get because I never check on it. But that was one that I again, I tried to sell a couple on OpenSea because I did get one of those, those dodgy offers that, I'll click on those. But I am quite security conscious with some of this. So what I do like about OpenSea is you can very quickly transfer it from one wallet to another. So I was like, well, I'll transfer these 2 across to just an unused wallet and I'll sell them. And I hadn't used OpenSea and I couldn't even tell you how long. But so I clicked on the first thing and that looked like it made sense. And then I started reading the second one. I had no idea what it was. So I just went, click, that'll do. And now, whenever I try and go through the gas fees and everything, I just get this warning error fail message. And I've got plenty of ETH in there to sell it. So I don't know, someone must have written something in it. They just now seem like they're 2 dead things. I can't do anything with them. I don't want to send them back to my main wallet. So I'm just like, I've just sort of abandoned those 2 and just maybe when I got a bit of time, I'll look. But it felt like it was, someone's probably tried to scam me in one way or another. I'm just glad I'd moved it out of my wallet. I mean, my wallet is backed by a Trezor, so I don't think someone could move anything, even if they had put a backdoor in, because they physically need to input the Trezor. But
I think, we did some moving around and sold a couple of things just before the end of the tax year just gone, and kind of made I almost use a new wallet for everything now. Like, just move it out and just in case. I mean, it slows the whole process down, obviously, and you kind of have to just think a lot more and be organized and remember what you put where and all that sort of stuff. And I was amazed at how much stuff had actually also changed on the OpenSea sort of process, like things coming up that just weren't a thing a year ago, because it'd been several months since I'd actually done anything on there at all, and I just the fear of like, what does this mean? Is this now normal? You have no idea, and I hate it. It's such a tense moment.
That when you're using MetaMask, you constantly having to do you approve this
Yes.
gas amount? Then do you approve the fee? You know, so you kind of just get used to pressing yes. But what struck me was one of the ones was I had to approve them to have access to the wallet.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm fairly sure that I've had to do that in the past, you know. So I was like, I'll click it. But then there was a second one. I can't remember what it was because I just instantly kind of clicked it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they certainly didn't sell. I had the ability to sell it at the fees, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't let me. I was thinking maybe it's because of being a bit stingy, because obviously I feel like I'm teaching you guys how to suck a egg here, but you know, the beauty with NFTs is that the creator can always get a cut, and it can be written into the smart contract how much they get. Well, I believe if they don't write it within the smart contract, you can choose anywhere from 0.1% to about 5 or 10%. So I was being stingy and giving the lowest possible amount to it. So I thought, oh, maybe that's what it is. So I thought, well, I'll bump it up to 0.5%. That still wouldn't make it sell. So I've just given up, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it was that was the bit that worried me when it said you've got to sign for basically to give access to your wallet for any of these particular tokens. Like, so I was, selling a VFriend or whatever, and it said, yeah, now approved that you're giving access to any VFriends in this wallet. They have access. And it's like, okay, that just feels bad.
Yeah.
Like it's okay if there's only one and that's the one you're selling, that's fine. But I would not want to then transfer. Well, yeah, I just wouldn't want to do it in a wallet that I was then wanted to keep hold of some VFriends, because then you're always thinking, well, have I revoked the access on that?
Sure.
And I've read a few things about that, and I'm like, well, I've seen people say, you can revoke access, but I don't know how to do that. Yeah. And then that's another thing to learn.
Well, we don't have a screen to show, but that actually is not too difficult. You can just, when you go on your medical mass, you can just click on little profiles, one of the drop-down menus in settings. But
fair enough.
But again, if you didn't know to look for it, you just
circling back to that original point, right? Like, we would consider ourselves been in the space for a long time, relatively technical people to a degree, and still having all sorts of confusion and troubles and usability problems, which I think is going to be interesting how the market and companies and the software adapts to sort of bridge that gap.
Well, if you go back to the internet, and everyone makes this example, and I'm not going to talk about it from the actual place of the internet, but if you remember, depends how old you are, when you used to type in your web address, that used to not be a web address. It was like 192.668. whatever. And then someone came up with the code that you could just put in, alphanumeric instead. And I feel like that's the stage we're now missing from crypto. So once that can be overcome and we're not having to put in long wallet addresses or confusing processes, that's when I see mainstream adoption. And every bull cycle, people talk about mainstream adoption, but ultimately, unless it's made user-friendly, that I can explain it to someone who's not techno-savvy very quickly, yes, we'll get the diehards. And I think we are the diehards.
Yeah.
But
I think it is tough, though, because, one of the best things about crypto, and also one of the most challenging things, is the fact that it gives you complete responsibility over the assets that you own and your financial control. You're now decentralized. You don't have to rely on the banks or other people, right? And so on one hand, that's very liberating and exactly why many people flock to it. But on the other hand, you are now solely responsible, right? And there's no one to help you out if it all goes wrong, no insurance and that kind of thing. And so I feel like to conquer the usability, but whilst also giving everyone the full level of control that you would kind of want, which is kind of like what we've got now, which ultimately just part of the package is if you have that level of control, things can be slightly complex. I think it will be quite a challenge to see that, but absolutely where it needs to go in my opinion.
You do have some of the big exchanges like Binance that do offer an insurance if they were hacked. Then you are covered. I don't know by how much, but for me, and I'm sure the same with yourselves, I'm very much, yes, I use centralized exchanges, but once I've done with whatever I need to do, it's mine. I've got it, because we've had FTX and we've had all sorts of other issues. So I just prefer to hold it myself and take that risk, because at least I can only blame myself then for not reading the pop-up box.
100%. So what was talked about at the moment, because like I said, we were chatting just before this about how when we first heard about NFTs and we'd been in the crypto space, but like myself, I heard about NFTs, having been following crypto for a long time. It took me ages to get my head around it. When was the moment when it kind of maybe clicked for you and you were like, okay, I understand this? Was there a particular collection? Was it the Derace collection when you got involved with it?
So I could understand from the beginning its use case for, as I said, digital art. But actually, what clicked for me, I was born in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s. I'm a gamer, and that's it. And I can really see a utility in games in the future, not just crypto games, which, to be fair, are pretty naff at the moment. I'm sure they'll get better. But you take games such as Fortnite or Call of Duty or CSGO, and they can sell skins and weapons and all that kind of stuff, which I think could have a real utility for NFT, very unique weapon skins, whatever it may be, that could be purchased and then traded. I think there's a genuine market for that. And actually, there was one gamer that I follow, a gentleman called Dr. Disrespect. He's one of the biggest gamers in the world. I think he's got like 4 million followers on YouTube. He's huge. He used to be he used to work for some of these gaming companies. He set up his own gaming company, a AAA gaming company called Midnight Society. And he released an NFT, and his view was, I'm going to do a first-person shooter game, and everyone will have their own avatar, and they can be completely tradable. So because I followed him, I got into that, and I bought one of those. I was first, I think it's like 4,000 of them. I think there's probably about 25,000 of them now. But again, mine's not the rarest. It's got some rarity to it. And I could actually see a genuine utility for the market of where it's going. And that's kind of when it clicked for me that if we can get some sort of adoption that way, then yes, I can see it. Because, you look at the likes of Bored Apes now and some of the other larger collections, and they're just out of reach for most people. Most people on their own cannot afford to buy it. Yes, you can get syndicates together to purchase one. But in terms of like trying to find some, utility for the everyday person, I think it's there. And so to go back to Fortnite and to Call of Duty, they're 2 free games, but the companies that run them earn billions of dollars every year selling these skins. So you turn that into an NFT side of things, and if you can bring that along in a game there, I think there's real value for whichever company can characterize that.
I totally agree. I enjoy Fortnite, and I'm praying for the day that Fortnite turns their skins into NFTs, because I'll be a very wealthy man, shall we say. I've splashed out a fair bit on that. But I think it'll be interesting because from the company's point of view, let's again take Epic Games, the creators behind Fortnite, free game that grosses billions and billions in revenue. But should they turn that into an NFT model where all of a sudden the skins are limited and now the players do have an element of ownership of it, all of a sudden it's likely going to actually hit their revenues, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of me giving them money to buy the skins, I'm now trading player to player and they're just getting a small percentage of the beat.
I mean, that's the balance, isn't it? And so I don't think we'll ever see the likes of Fortnite doing it, because they've got their model and their model works. But the way that the gaming industry is going, and if they can really sync that kind of enjoyable gaming sense with the graphics from a crypto standpoint, whoever can come up with that, I think will be on. But if you look at, there's a game called CSGO, Counter-Strike Global, I think I can't remember what the Go bit stands for, and you can unlock cases to unlock weapons. Well, I checked before I arrived here because I just wanted to double check, but in the last week, they've had one skin sell for $500,000 on the market, and another one is still being bid at the moment, and its current bid price is $200,000. That's the one skin on a weapon. So people are paying astronomical amounts.
This game is quite old.
Oh, it must be, 10, 12 years old? Yeah. But they're incredibly rare, and the rarest ones you can get are knives, because they're very rare to come out of these cases. And so that's what people look for, and then you can sell them on the open market. Now, they're not NFTs, because you could get a couple of them that are not unique in that aspect, but it's that kind of principle that I think you could potentially get. You could purchase something very cheap and then later on that become very expensive and benefit from it that way. But
they're a fantastic case study of getting an in-game economy quite right.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, when you look into it and go down that rabbit hole.
I mean, the other side you could look at it from the games is you had this play-to-earn kind of model, which ultimately was flawed because you were paid out in a token, and that tokens was only ever to be sold, and so it just never grew in value. Axie Infinity is a great example of that. But if you could maybe have it where you play to earn coins or tokens within that, then you could go on to buy those skins, and those skins are NFTs, then there's a way of doing it. You're right, that is going to eat into the likes of Epic.
They're called
bottom dollar. So, yeah.
But then it's like, well, if it spawns this in-game economy, which all of a sudden, because from a player's perspective, it's absolutely what you'd want. And that would make the game that much more desirable, because now there's a real tangible value to all the assets you're collecting, which is likely going to make you more invested in the game and play it more, and then probably grow the playership. So in theory, even though they lose out, like in the way we discussed, it could be better for the whole ecosystem and they could benefit in the broader capacity.
Yeah, and it's like, I think what has changed, even, in the kind of, how long have we been doing this? Like 6-9 months or so. A big part of a big positive of NFTs in all of our initial conversations were the royalties, and so much has changed already in relation to that like there's 0% royalty kind of marketplaces now that are just disrupting everything, and so that whole thing for a lot of these projects has gone away completely, and I think a lot of the projects, that was their plan, that was their revenue, kind of, that was what was going to fund everything and the roadmap and all that sort of stuff. And so, it's fascinating but that subject has not like gone away or whatever. I think that will just evolve and change over time, and that's the sort of thing that once, I don't know, well, that's a big factor of whether companies like that are going to go down this route. And it just seems it seems very much you have to be, it's changing all the time, and like especially with this Blur platform now, where people are, I mean, I don't even understand it, but like bidding and Blur farming to get this sort of make money that way, and that's having quite a detrimental impact on the floor prices of some of these blue chip projects. So that's dragged the Bored Ape and the Punk floor down significantly in the last few weeks, and it's just because they're having to move them, and sort of you somehow earn these points from placing bids and stuff. But there's huge sums of money involved. But it's all having quite a it's all changing very, very sort of very quickly, and I think that whole royalty thing that right at the start, that was the creator's going to continually get 10% or 5% on every transaction.
A lot of projects built their entire models off this, right? And so I can speak to it because I'm part of the Gents Croquet Club, which was a 1,000-piece sort of membership club. It was quite unique, and I've talked about it here before. And so that's always has actually done very well, and it's weathered the bear market very well because it's got a lot of real tangible, in real life benefits and so on. However, they've had to do a shift in their business model because it was built on the revenues from the royalties that they would pull through from all the secondary market sales. But because of just the growth in these marketplaces that now just bypass that, their revenue streams have been completely hit. And so they've now had to launch different platforms of membership where you pay like annual fees with this kind of stuff. And it caused a real big shock of negative sentiment. And one day the floor price just absolutely dropped. And so I know there's lots of things in the work they're working on to build it back up and kind of address a lot of that. And so hopefully a positive outlook in the future. But again, like forcing them to completely adapt and pivot and change and, ultimately potentially have to go, in slightly different directions to what was initially promised because of something that is outside their control. But I guess very much like in the world of business, right? You're always dealt with these curveballs every now and then.
So how does that work? Sorry, I understand that in the smart contract, it's written that there is a percentage of royalties, but if they want to change that to try and compete with zero royalties, do they still have access to the smart contract to be able to change that, or do they just have to accept that product has that one built in? I don't know.
Well, I don't know specifically, but I think even on OpenSea now, it's not. You can choose to you can choose to include a royalty.
Okay.
But you don't have to.
I think it's literally just editing and bypassing some of the code. But not too sure on technicals myself. But very annoying if you are a creator, because there's a whole debate in and of itself. But it's going to be interesting to see what other challenges.
I think for me, how can I put this? Because it's not mainstream media, but it certainly feels that, because people don't understand NFTs, people focus more on the negative side of the stories. Yes. And so you hear a lot more about influencer-related scams or just failed projects or what have you. And actually, you don't really hear about the fact that a lot of NFTs have managed to keep their floor during this time. Jack, you think about Jack Dorsey's original tweet that he sold for like 2.9 million, and everyone was delighted that that was going to be at Sotheby's for 14,000 or wherever it was being auctioned off. You know, that was newsworthy, but you know, that didn't seem like that needed to be an NFT anyway. That was more of a gimmick. But actually, some of these, you know, very well respected blue chip NFTs have actually managed. They're still selling for ridiculous amounts I was going to say of Ethereum, but isn't it? So
CryptoPunks, a project that was literally free at the start.
Yeah.
And what's the current floor price?
It's still, I think it's still close to 60 ETH. So it's still
120 grand.
Yeah,
It's, yeah. Amazing, really, when you think about it. So, you know, those people that have, you know, whether they've hodled through the bear market thinking it's going to come back and then turn their nose up at NFTs, well, actually, what they might have done is moved their fortune at whatever their portfolio was into an NFT and maybe not have felt the pain as much. But I mean, I appreciate that, you know, the value of things like Bored Apes they're not being susceptible. They have dropped. They just haven't potentially dropped as much as what others have. And again, you know, very famously, people love to report the likes of Justin Bieber having to sell his at a massive loss. And did I read Seth Green? He had his hacked and had to pay for it to come back and all that kind of stuff. So they're the kind of stories that people focus on because everyone likes to see people lose out. I don't know why, but it's just unfortunately
Cruel
where it is.
Human
at the moment.
psychology.
Yeah,
negativity.
Another
always
podcast, that
wins.
one, I think. But
yeah, for sure. It's just easier, especially at the moment. I was actually talking to my cousin about this at the weekend. He's in our Moonshot DAO and lives in Hong Kong, and he said that he'd met or was introduced to this person recently, and somehow they got on the subject of NFTs, and this person wasn't a fan, and it's just like, you know, I just said, well, I just don't even talk about it anymore.
I think
it's just easier not to.
The worst argument I get for it, and it wind me up, it annoys me anyway, is when people are like, oh, well, I can just right click and save it. And I'm like, yeah, you can, but that's exactly the same with the Mona Lisa. I could just go and buy a print of it or take a photo, you know? Deep down, I know that photo or that print isn't actually the original. And that's the whole point, is you want that credibility, or you want that kudos that comes with the fact that you do own it and you put value to that. It doesn't matter if someone else doesn't. And yeah, someone might be able to right click it, but you can't stop that from happening. Ultimately, they can't sell it on. They've just got a copy of it. So I think that's a very weak excuse, and I'll be first to put my hand up and say, you know, I probably used that myself at the beginning of it, and you know, trying to laugh and joke about these.
I think we all did.
You know, who thought that, you know, a monkey's melted face was going to make what it makes? And
honestly,
you know,
it's crazy when you look back. Now. It's crazy when you look back because, yeah, it was just a very unusual thing, and I think it's a very knee-jerk, natural reaction for people, very much like we all probably had, to just kind of write it off and be like, well, that's a bit silly, right-click save. But when you actually do the bit of research and get a bit of understanding about the blockchain and about the actual usability, use case, purpose of it, only then can you kind of gain the insight.
I also think that because we're such a young industry, I've used we as if I'm a main part of it, but because it's such a young industry, you know, even the industry itself doesn't have the technology to tokenize a lot of real world assets. I was talking about this on Tuesday night, you know, so ideally, tokenizing things like stocks or properties or something like that could be a great future. And similarly, you know, that's the same with NFTs. So there are only a limited amount of use cases at the moment, but when the technology improves, it's endless what you could have as an NFT. And I think that's a very interesting topic. And you know, I think what will probably happen is the technology will come there, mainstream adoption, and there'll still be NFTs, but people won't realize they're talking about an NFT.
They'll just stop being called NFTs.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they'll stop, but yeah, you know, I mean, NFT is not the greatest name, but it's easier to say than non-fungible token, isn't it? So, but yeah, I think there'll just come a time where they finally stop laughing at you, they finally stop fighting you, and they've just joined you. So, yeah.
So we talked about art, gaming, tokenization. How do you see, or what are the key areas in the NFT landscape and use cases that you can really see either taking off or completely kind of bombing and disappearing over the next decade, let's say?
In terms of, I think the art side of it, what we need to get is not necessarily the bad players, because I don't think most people start off as a bad player, but I think there's just a lot that don't really serve their purpose, much like 99% of all altcoins don't need to actually be there. So I like the art space. I think that because it had first mover advantage within the space, I think that will always be there. And what you'll have is you will have very credible teams that will continue to produce very credible pieces that will just always increase in value. And yeah, so I think that's a huge positive. I do think, for me, I think gaming is going to be a very big move in the next sort of bull cycle, the bull cycle after that. So I think there's a real opportunity if people can get that right. The problem is games take years to develop, so it's not something you can just do overnight. So it might be a slow burn, but I think there's some real sides out there. In terms of other things, I mean, we touched on music, but any digital artist, I think, will benefit from that, whatever medium your art is. In terms of property, I've heard people talk about, using NFTs to own properties or portions of properties. And for me, I probably just can't really get my head around how or why that would necessarily work. Yes, I suppose you could say that each property is individual, and by the function of what an NFT is supposed to do, then yeah, okay, maybe there's that there. But I think I need to be convinced on that one. I listen to the arguments for it, but maybe it's just because the technology lacks where it is. But I look at it, I'm thinking more maybe opportunities like financial portfolios where you have a mix of, say precious metals and fiats and stocks and all that kind of stuff. And it is very unique in each of the one. Then maybe you could own that, and it's just like you own that one. Of course, it's backed in inverted commas by however well that portfolio is underwritten and backed within it. And then you could just trade that individually to people and move it across. Maybe there's an opportunity there. So there's another financial side to that. And I'm trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head. I'm feeling like I'm probably missing a real obvious one here that you're going to be like, what about this? But yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Because when we were chatting with Siam the other week, because his big area that he thinks was all around the tokenization of various assets, which you already touched on, and certainly seems very logical. I'm with you in the gaming boat, I think, for a lot of the reasons we've discussed. I think there's a huge bit of potential there. And then I'm just interested to see some of the more fun and interesting ways that companies are using it. I mean, Matt's talked about on this podcast before about the what was it, the bar NFT that you got?
Yeah. I mean, almost like membership clubs.
Yeah,
like effectively, aren't they? But I think that's bound to happen more. I think ticketing as well, that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that just makes a lot of sense.
Did I see one of your podcasts we talked about, was it Coldplay or someone had done a ticket where...
Yes. So I went to see Coldplay in Belgium and got there literally just as they were starting, and I was like, quick, need to grab a beer so I can, get lubricated to thoroughly enjoy this, and went to pay, and they're like, oh no, you need this Coldplay card. And so everywhere in the stadium, you had to go and load cash onto this Coldplay card and then use that in the stadium. And I was like, well, wouldn't that be so much better if my ticket was an NFT, which before then I could load it up and then... the whole system would be much, much better.
One of the ones that I've seen people talk about, and one former member of our group was talking about, was perhaps being able to put medical data and having that as an individual NFT that could then be sold for research. And there's an interesting project that I researched in one of the videos, recently called Oasis Network, which is kind of looking at that kind of element of things. So instead of you providing your entire medical record, you could provide a portion of that to medical research, so they get the data that they need to do the research without exposing every single ailment that you particularly have. And so I could see that. And then I suppose if you kept that, the founder's fee or whatever you'd like to call it, there's a way that companies could continue to make that, or you personally could make that money every time you sell it on to a company. So, and then that got me thinking into maybe that you could do that with your social media profile again, which is what this Oasis network is looking at. So there's definitely companies that are looking to try and see how they can move the boundaries of that. I go back to, what made the internet tick, and I'm wondering how you could do it in gambling, because as much as I loathe how sponsorship deals are done for online gambling, because I think we have a huge problem with that, at the end of the day, everyone's a grown-up, they should take account. So maybe there's an opportunity, I don't know how, but the gambling sector, if they could get into the NFTs, I think they could really help promote, whether or not it's a good or a bad way, that whole side of things. So there's definitely an opportunity there.
I'm very interested to see more and more how NFTs are used to bridge a gap with physical goods as well. Because I remember having a chat with a gentleman who has an NFT project that you get an NFT which verifies and authenticates like very rare, expensive cigars. And so when you actually get the physical asset, it's also backed with the NFT, which then provides the level of certification and authentication. And I think how that continues to build in these luxury goods markets and using that sort of way, I think could be quite interesting. And will be an area that I'm certainly interested to see how it develops anyway.
Am I right in thinking that with your Bored Ape Yacht Club membership, you can like eat at a restaurant for free, or there's some sort of restaurant somewhere where you can go, and if you're an ape, you can prove it, then you get your meal? Or...
I think because there's a lot of spin-off kind of businesses, because you got the IP with that, ownership of that token. There are things like restaurants and certainly burger places and that sort of stuff, and coffee shops and stuff like that I think then do offer benefits to holders.
Because couldn't then Starbucks do something, and and then like you say, it's a real world good which you would not class as being an NFT at all, because one cup of coffee is another cup of coffee, but suddenly
they have. Well, they have invested heavily in their loyalty scheme, haven't they?
Right,
and
okay.
Going down an NFT route, Starbucks very famously a few months ago, it was a big news story, because I remember Starbucks have been using their app for many years. You can load up the app, pay with the app, and you get stars, right? And it's a genius system from them, because I think at any given time there was something like $6 billion just sat in Starbucks apps waiting to be spent at Starbucks stores. And they're, like a few companies now, a few of these big companies have proactively said they're looking into and using and making investments in NFTs to see whether or not that's going to be a variant of how they do that in the future.
Okay.
So,
There we go.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think rewards and loyalty schemes and stuff like that, it has to kind of factor into that more and more.
Because it ties into some of the fun usability around NFTs, because you could have your Starbucks NFT, let's say it's just the plain cup, but then the more you shop, your cup, once you've bought 100 coffees, all of a sudden you get one little gold star in it, 200 and so on and so forth, until eventually, once you've bought 1,000 coffees, like I must have over the last few years, you get a diamond cup, and all of a sudden that gets you access to all hosts of other in real life events. Bit like similar gaming NFTs, or collections where they've added in features. Almost, I remember one case where every time it was sold, the quality of the picture would degrade. It would get slightly more pixelated. And so over time, the more and more people or transactions, the more and more blurred it would get. So all of a sudden, there was just a real, prestigious element to these variants that either had never been sold or had only been sold once or twice, because now they're so much clearer.
I wonder
and there's
if
that
they
physical evidence of it.
Stole that idea. Do you remember Banksy had a painting that is sold at auction, and then as soon as it went through, it shredded itself.
Yeah.
And now it's like even more valuable because it happened.
Yeah.
But if you have like a fully degraded one, I wonder if that is still pretty valuable, because it's like, wow, actually, so many people like this one that it's got to it. But that's an interesting concept, that one, definitely.
Yeah, it'd be funny just to see how more and more people experiment with it. But I do think we're in a bit of a case now where, as we always see in crypto, when the prices are really high, the flood of interest from everyone, active participation just goes crazy. And of course, the flood of investment that goes into all these things goes through the roof. When you're through these kind of periods of slower time, that quickly diminishes, and you're left with, I guess, kind of the hardcore group that are trooping on despite it. So typically, I would imagine when things do take a nice little uptick, hopefully will be the catalyst for a flurry of new innovative projects, ideas and things to come out.
Yeah, same with the crypto market. Part of me is, last bull cycle in 2017, there was like 1,000 altcoins. Last one was 22,000 or whatever. And I also think similarly with the NFTs, what you don't want, though, if we're just talking about the art form of it, which we kind of all know, is suddenly there'd be 50,000 variants that suddenly flood the market at the same time, and it kind of like undermines not the quality of the really good ones, because I think they shine, but sort of people just kind of get lost with the noise. And actually, it's quite nice to just be an exclusive club, because the worst thing that could possibly happen for both for the crypto market and ultimately my example for the NFT is if suddenly people just went, now there's too many of them, I've lost all interest. There's a mass exodus of it. Like I say, most of those altcoins don't serve a purpose at the moment, and so they just die away. And what knock-on effect that could have with the ones that do stand, even if it is just in the short term, could be a bad thing. And I think that's probably the same with NFTs. And I remember trying to get into them because I couldn't afford a Bored Ape or anything by the time I was looking into it. But you're just overwhelmed by the amount that are there. And I was like, well, how do I know that's a good project? Because, yes, I can look in the individual, I can see their past and see what projects they've done in the past and how many of these are they selling, what's the rarities, how do each of them change? I get that, but everyone seems to have exactly the same angle with kind of the same business model. And, unfortunately, you just get to the point where there's just too many. Then I'm just going to accept that, unfortunately, I missed that golden opportunity. And I'm sure there'll be another that comes along.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because on a lot of what were, incredibly valuable projects 12 months ago, they are now very, very affordable. But the big unknown, the big question mark is, will it ever get back to what it was before? Because, if it does, then we should be doing some shopping at the moment, But of course, who knows?
Because, you think everyone talks about the Bitcoin and the crypto market being young, but the NFT market is, it's an absolute baby in comparison, really. So, yeah, you're right. And then there's the global economic side, which everyone in the crypto space has been talking about for the last 12 months, about major global recessions going to really knock crypto over. And we're not really seeing that at the moment. In fact, crypto and Bitcoin in particular seems to be a
bit of a good
route for a haven. Yeah, similar to gold. And I wonder then are some of these really good quality NFT projects going to be seen in the same light? And actually, well, that's a good place for me to temporarily store my wealth whilst the global markets recorrect. So there could be an opportunity there, and that unfortunately none of us have a crystal ball. So that's why we do it. It's all about probabilities, isn't it?
Exactly.
Just leaning into your sort of, your strength and your success you've had with crypto in general. For anyone that's listening that perhaps don't know, hasn't had a play yet, or doesn't own any crypto at all, what would your suggestion be to them for a starting point?
So, that's a good question, because again, it's easy to say we'll just jump into Bitcoin because it's a big one. What I would say is, for anyone that's starting out, is it may feel like the market moves very fast because the price is quite volatile, but actually it is relatively slow paced, and you can see all these numbers of 1,000x's and everything just thrown out there. But ultimately, I always think, because I still believe in what's called the 4-year cycle, so every time I go into this, I'm thinking I'm tying up my money for 4 years, and then we'll reevaluate at the end of that. So you don't have to rush necessarily into it. So what you got to try and understand is, what's your risk appetite and what you're trying to get out of it. Now, if you think that the global financial markets are a complete con and they're all going to collapse in the next 20 years, then you probably want to be getting into Bitcoin and never selling it, just, trying to own that because that's where you think it's going to be. And what I will say about Bitcoin is I think it's the only one that has a genuine proof of, or store of value, store of wealth, whatever you want to call it, use case. And it's got a fantastic mechanism within how it's mined and how it's produced and all of that. It has this thing called the hash rate, and its strength and its security has never been any stronger than it is at the moment. So I'd be looking to get into that, but that can be quite daunting. It's $30,000 just under a Bitcoin at the moment. So, if you're new to this, that can be quite a pill to.
And I found some people find it kind of funny buying 0.001 of something.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like the very first thing they're dipping their toes into.
Exactly. Well, there's 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. So it is completely divisible right down to. So you would definitely want some of that within your portfolio. But the reality is, it's not going to move as fast as some of the altcoins. And that's where a lot of people that have been in the industry long enough prefer to dip their toe into, because Bitcoin's already at 30,000. It's only a 2x to get back to its all-time high, or just over. But some of these altcoins, get back to their all-time high at 10x's. And so there's an opportunity there to make money. And so I would certainly have a look at having not a too diverse portfolio. Last bull run I had at one stage probably 80 tokens, and it was ridiculous. So I couldn't keep hold of them all. Now I think I'm about 9 or 10, and that's all I'll be. And I'm very comfortable with a lot less for now, he says. Come back to me in a year and I'll try. So I would say, have a look at some of the ones or have a balance of ones that you've researched, you think have got a genuine use case, and go with those. And then if you really need to scratch an itch, use a very small percentage of your portfolio to try and find something that does make 100x or a 10x. Yeah. But just know, going into those, you could have 99 that fall on their ass. But that one that does will actually recover those losses. So you're going to take a hit. So you're not going to make a full 100x because it's very unlikely that all of the ventures you go into will be successful. But I don't generally talk about them, but the one that I've mentioned the most to most people in the group was straight after the crash, after the pandemic. That's when I got back into Bitcoin, buy when everyone's fearful. And I bought into ADA and XRP, so Cardano and Ripple. And ADA at the time was about 3 or 4 cents. And I was very fortunate. I rode that all the way up to over $3 and sold it then. So that was like a 75x on what it was, a very blue chip altcoin. So they definitely have opportunities to do that. Now, that sounds great, but there were plenty of those 80 tokens that I had that I've lost money out on. So, they all balance themselves out, but you can still, that felt like a relatively safe bet, and I didn't put that much in, but it still had that opportunity to explode because, that's the excitement of altcoins, really. And I suppose that's similar with NFTs in terms of you think one's, it's got a good team and a good backing, and all it needs now is, some good movement within the markets, and off it goes.
Yeah, exactly. It's all a lot easier if you have that crystal ball, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of your portfolio then, what role do NFTs play in it at the moment, and how do you see that changing in the future?
So I am, at the moment, the value of NFTs I have in my portfolio is probably 3 to 5%, which some would say is a pretty good balance of where that should be. But the reality is that I bought the majority of those for not really knowing what I'm doing. So I'd actually say ones that I believe in, it's probably less than 1%, because I have, I don't know, probably about 8 or 9 different NFTs, across what I've gone and purchased. I think it's somewhere that I'd like to be more involved in. I think, I'd like to have some blue chip NFTs in my portfolio, because I think there's a case for it. And I said they've stood the test of time there. But even for myself, that's been in 2 cycles and done well out of it, some of those blue chip ones I feel are actually out of my reach in terms of me personally wanting to buy one. You go on OpenSea and you see a floor price of 60 ETH and you think it's not even that impressive a one compared to ones at the top of the market. That can be very difficult to swallow. So then it's more of a case of, right, I'll accept that I've missed those, but I know the people who are behind those, and I just need to keep on the radar for any new ones that come out. Yes, they're going to come out expensive, but hopefully they'll also move. And so that's sort of where I'm looking is the next kind of step, really, hopefully.
Nice. Makes perfect sense. And so given your active levels in the whole market, it'd be very interesting to get, what is your kind of just current read on the market as a whole at the moment? And, if you did have a crystal ball, what would you be saying for the next kind of 3, 6, 12 months?
Okay, so I was quite fortunate that I got out I still took a hit in 2022, but I got around about March, April, so about 12 months ago. And, I was on the sidelines for all of the 3 big incidents, so Luna, Celsius, FTX. And then I kind of realized at the beginning of this year, and I've been quite vocal on my calls, that I'm starting to get back in. Now, I've been edging back in, but I'm about 75% back in the market at the moment. And I do feel that there has been a shift and a turn within that. And I unfortunately, my crystal ball doesn't work, because I still get the feeling that the market might still correct. Now, I don't pay too much attention to fractal patterns of what's happened, mainly because we're too young a market. We've only had 3 bull cycles. So, but if you do look, the previous 3 bull cycles, immediately after we've hit the bottom, we've always had a sharp rebound before it then, falling away again. And it never gets back to the level it hit, but it certainly comes close. And I was just like, this feels like a good time to get back in. There was some good momentum going back up. So I thought, well, I will get in and I'll try and make some profit on the way up. And then I won't sell at the top, because I didn't get in at the bottom, and I'll never sell at the top. But I'll feel when that shift has changed again, I'll get out and then I'll look to move back in. So I do believe in the 4-year cycle. So every 4 years, the mining rate of Bitcoin halves. So we're at 6.5 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, for those that aren't aware. So in round about a year's time, depends on, it's after 800,000 blocks. And although it's supposed to be 10 minutes, it's not always the case. So around about April next year, we're going to have the next halvening event. And typically what we see is, because it becomes more scarce, price goes up. And that's the same. That's why stock to flow ratios work on other assets such as gold. And so I feel that we will range in some sort of way for the next 12 months. Yes, it will go up, but I think we'll also correct back down. So, levels, we can just pluck them out. Whether or not we stay at 35 or 40 or even 50, I honestly don't know. Do I think we'll revisit the low 20s? Yeah, I think we probably will, especially if we think there is going to be a recession in the second half of this year. But then when we start to get into the halvening, I do expect Bitcoin's the king, so that will drive the rest up to start to move upwards. And then I think we'll go from there. And I think that'll bring all markets, it doesn't matter what it is, I think that will drive NFTs up. I think it'll drive altcoins up. I think it'll drive the rest up. In terms of how high that can go, I don't know. But usually what we see is around about a 12 to 18 month period of parabolic, certainly very high and sort of climbing. And I think people will probably laugh at me for this, but I think somewhere between 100 and maybe 120K is probably where we will go. I'm sure a lot of people will say 350,000 or $500,000 or whatever. I just don't see that yet because there's a lot of other altcoins that are out there that take up the market share, but that's still an incredible amount. And this is what I try and explain to people in the group I was in was, I was buying at 16,000, 18,000 and 23,000, I think, for the Bitcoin levels. And I was like, well, if it does get to 100K, why qualm over, you were waiting for 15, instead of you making $85,000 profit per Bitcoin, you're only going to make 84,000. In the grand scheme of things, does it necessarily matter? And that I was so used to being a bear for 12 months, and it was really hard to buy. But now that I've done it, I genuinely don't care. I feel so comfortable that I'm back in the market that feels like it was the right move. Now it might not be, and ultimately that's fine. But I've got my 4-year horizon. I've switched now to where will I be in 4 years' time, and so I can kind of weather any storm. And if you're going to be a trader, you've got to expect that you're going to be in the red at some stage. It's just what you do to manage that. So that was a very long answer, I think.
No, very helpful though. And so, would you mind disclosing what sort of things you're in at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm in Bitcoin. I don't have any Ethereum at the moment, which might be a mistake, but I don't. Polkadot, so Dot. That's actually my largest allocation. I'm regarded as a bit of a Dot moon boy.
We love Dot.
So I've got some Chainlink or Link, some Polygon or Matic. So I'm using both names here. What else? I own some Doge. I own Doge solely for the Elon effect. I genuinely, every time he puts something out on Doge and it pumps, I sell a bit. That's what I do. And so I
just had a field day when they changed the Twitter logo.
I sold half my pot, but then I didn't get to buy it back in because it never went down as far as I thought it'd go. So I've just moved it into other tokens. I have some exchange tokens like BNB and OKX, which is a sort of an Eastern exchange, which I think is going to do well. I'm trying to think some of the other ones. ADA got a little bit off. So I'm quite blue chip at the moment, I'll be honest. But what I will look to do is just keep a little bit to one side because, I guarantee there's a token now that's ranked 4,000 or whatever no one's ever heard of. It'll be in the top 50 in the next bull cycle. You just aren't aware of it yet, but there's always innovation coming through, which is always a great thing. So I like to say, there's only about 8 or 9 tokens. I've probably listed 6 or 7. So close to the wall, I think.
Nice. And so in your years of experience in these various markets then, would you mind sharing what's been your biggest win and then also your biggest loss?
Okay, biggest win. So my biggest win was, we didn't touch on it, but I have done mining in the past. So I bought a mining rig. Well, I didn't do Bitcoin. I did altcoins. And I mined a token called Ravencoin for about 3 years. And if you include electricity fees and you include the cost of it, over those 3 years, probably spent about £25,000, which is a lot for a token. And then suddenly it went from like 0.0001% to 30 cents. Now I'd sold before it got to 30 cents, so I can't be too excited. But I sold around about 22 cents. And I think it made me, it was probably around about, I was going to say in dollars. I'm trying to work out what it's in pounds because let's change it. I spent $30,000 on the mining equipment and the rig, and I reckon I sold it for about $250,000. So that was like, it was because I did pay for the token, obviously, but I didn't actually physically buy the token. I mined it, which was an interesting conversation to have with my accountant. But that was probably my best success story. In terms of losses, I've had so many. I stayed in rebasing DAOs too long, so that one hurt.
Yeah.
I don't think this was necessarily my biggest, but the one that stuck with me the most was I was derivatives trading last year, and I had gone in on a very low cap token called GMT. And when you're trading, you've got basically a stop loss, hopefully, if you're a good trader, and you've got a liquidation point. And if it hits your stop loss, you should be out of the trade. Liquidation point, you're handing everything to the exchange. And they're calculated by two different ways. And I don't want to bore everyone, but suffice to say, there's a thing called the last traded price and the marked price. They're two separate entities. And unless you change your settings, your liquidation price is based on a marked price, and the last traded price is where your stop loss is. And this marked price deviated massively away from the last traded price, and it was almost 40%. And so the price stopped just below where my stop loss is, so I stayed in the trade. But the marked price kept on going up and up and up, and it immediately hit my liquidation point and then reversed. And it felt, I wrote to the exchange, and I complained about this, and they obviously gave me some crap about why it was genuine, and I just couldn't, and I really lost my taste. And I probably lost, I don't know, about $20,000, I think, which isn't a huge amount. It sounds like a lot, trust me. It felt like a lot, but it's always stuck with me, because it just felt so manipulated. Yeah. So that one probably hurt the most. Another one, which I lost 27 ETH once, which hurt. At the time, it was about 1,700.
How did you lose it?
So, very similar thing. I was trading it, and I got in the car. So I was trading on my mobile phone, and I thought that it was going to do something. So I put it in. I thought I'd hit a stop loss, and the UI on the mobile phone, I'd actually pressed a long for the stop loss. So it just assumed I'd made a mistake. So I didn't bother putting a stop loss in. I then got in the car, drove 2 hours. I remember it, 19th of May, to go to Durham to get my daughter or my son a passport. By the time I got out of the car, the market had dumped and I'd lost it all. And that was completely my fault, but that one hurt.
Well, that's the thing.
So that one was, again, and that's why I don't really trade anymore, because everyone will tell you about all their good stories and everything they've done. And, ultimately, for all the good work that I've done in trading, I've lost a lot as well. So I'm going to count the time and the stress and waking up at 4 a.m. and checking your phone and not being able to have a good night's sleep. I just thought it's just not worth it. It's just not worth my time. I'm not that good at it. Why bother going into it? As these two stories have shown me, I'm not that good at it. So
self-awareness is everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
But I think just overall, just being in this space has been a win for me. As cheesy as that sounds, like the education I've taught myself, the sort of the connections, yes, but actually the freedom it now affords me to do is great. And that's been a very, I've been in it 6 years now, and it's slow and steady. People talking about these 1,000 X's, yes, they're there, but they don't always happen. And just, for anyone that is looking to get into it, to go back to that, you just don't come in with an unrealistic time frame. It's just like any other asset. This is part of a long-term plan that you have, or you should have, but take profit. Absolutely take profit. It may feel alien to do it, but money in the bank feels a lot better. And if you need to, reinvest it somewhere else. But yeah,
exactly.
Good advice.
I love it. Well, so like I said, this podcast is all about demystifying the mystic world of NFTs for the kind of everyday investor. And so, do you have any closing words of advice, Harry, for our listeners about dipping their toes into the space?
Into NFTs?
Mm-hmm. And the kind of crypto spaces.
With NFTs, I think for me, it is absolutely understanding it. It is new, as we've talked about. There's lots of different variants within it. But, don't be afraid to just do a bit of research beforehand. And if some of those ones that are, you guys will know more than me, but if some of the ones that you're interested in are just the floor price is outside where you are, I know there's plenty of organizations and syndicates in which you can get together and just you own the leg or the eyeball of a board of monkey, whatever it is. So it takes time, but that's exactly the same for the crypto side of things. Is education is key, and actually there's a lot of free education out there. So yes, be in a community if you want to, but just make sure you actually understand what it is that you're doing. And then the other thing is, because it is the Wild West, is just be careful. Security is everything. And if you don't physically have it, or say physically, digitally have it somewhere off an exchange behind a locked mechanism of some sort, then just assume that you're probably going to lose it at some stage. And so just take your time with everything. Even if the price is dumping at a rapid rate, take the extra 2 minutes to sell it so you don't send it the wrong way, because The thing about blockchain technology is once you make a mistake, it's very unlikely you can get it back. And that's both a beauty and a curse.
Absolutely. Very wise words, very wise words. Well,
yeah,
Harry,
thanks for sharing.
No worries.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
Harry.
having
It's been
me.
an absolute pleasure. Matt, any closing remarks?
Not really. Only that there's still a lot going on. Like loads going on. Like Twitter is still the first place I look. But I mean, OpenSea itself is the homepage is always showing what's trending, what's happening right now, and I feel like a bit of a broken record. I say every episode, there's opportunities out there. You do have to work, search a little bit harder and spend a bit more time on it. But even in this, particularly sort of low moment in the market, there's stuff to find and opportunities to be had. So still worthy of some time, still worthy of some effort, and still some wins available to whoever wants them.
Absolutely. Very wise words, very wise words. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Harry, thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
Very, very insightful. And please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, everyone, to the moon.